It was a sweltering summer afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs heavy in the sky, and the air feels thick enough to slice through. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a lawnmower or the distant laughter of kids chasing ice cream trucks. But in one backyard, tension was simmering, ready to boil over. This wasn't just any backyard, it was Marcus's backyard. Marcus, a proud black man in his early 30s, had worked tirelessly to turn his modest home into a sanctuary. And the crown jewel of that sanctuary? His sparkling, crystal-clear pool. It wasn't just a pool to him. It was a symbol of his hard work, his success, and his right to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But on this particular day, that symbol was about to be tested in a way he never expected. Enter Karen. You know the type, entitled, nosy, and always ready to make someone else's day a little harder. She lived a few houses down, and from the moment Marcus moved in, she made it clear she wasn't thrilled about having him as a neighbor. At first, it was subtle, sideways glances, muttered comments under her breath, the occasional complaint about his music being too loud, even when it was barely audible. But lately, her behavior had taken a turn for the worse. It started with her calling the homeowners association, claiming Marcus's pool was a safety hazard because it attracted too many kids. Then came the passive-aggressive notes, left in his mailbox, suggesting he keep the noise down during his weekend barbecues. Marcus had tried to brush it off, chalking it up to her being, well, a Karen. But what happened next? That was the last straw. It was a Saturday, and Marcus had invited a few close friends over to enjoy the pool. The mood was light, the grill was fired up, and the sound of splashing water and laughter filled the air. That's when Karen showed up, uninvited and unannounced. She marched right up to the fence, her face twisted in that all-too-familiar scowl, and started yelling. "Do you even have a permit for this pool?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cheerful atmosphere. Marcus tried to keep his cool, explaining that yes, he had all the necessary permits and that he wasn't doing anything wrong. But Karen wasn't having it. "This is a family neighborhood," she snapped. "We don't need this kind of disruption." The word hung in the air like a dark cloud. Disruption. Marcus knew what she meant. It wasn't about the pool or the noise or the kids. It was about him, about the color of his skin, about the fact that he didn't fit her idea of what a good neighbor should look like. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, the joy of the day slipping away like water down a drain. Marcus felt his chest tighten, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He'd dealt with racism before. Subtle digs, microaggressions, the occasional outright insult. But this was different. This was personal. And it was happening in his own backyard, the one place he was supposed to feel safe. For a moment, he considered letting it go, walking away, ignoring her, and going back to his day. But something inside him snapped. He was tired of the sideways glances, tired of the muttered comments, tired of being made to feel like he didn't belong. He took a deep breath, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He could call the police, but he knew how that would go. He could confront her directly, but that would only escalate things. Or he could do something else, something that would send a message, not just to Karen, but to anyone else who thought they could treat him this way. What happened next would change everything. Marcus made a decision, one that would leave the neighborhood talking for weeks. But before we get to that, let's rewind a bit. Let's talk about how Marcus got here, about the struggles he faced growing up, and about the journey that led him to this moment. Because this isn't just a story about a pool or a Karen. It's a story about resilience, about standing up for yourself, and about what happens when you finally say, enough is enough. So, grab a seat, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And trust me, by the time we're done, you'll be on the edge of your seat, wondering, what did Marcus do? Marcus wasn't always the kind of man who could afford a house with a pool. Growing up, he lived in a small apartment in the city with his mom and two younger sisters. Money was tight, and space was tighter. His mom worked double shifts as a nurse, often coming home exhausted but still managing to make sure her kids had what they needed. Marcus admired her strength, but he also saw the toll it took on her. He promised himself early on that he'd do whatever it took to give his family a better life. And that meant working harder than anyone else. As a teenager, Marcus juggled school, a part-time job, and helping out at home. He didn't have time for much else, but he never complained. He knew the sacrifices his mom was making, and he was determined to make them count. When he graduated high school, he didn't have the luxury of taking a gap year or going off to college like some of his classmates. Instead, he got a job at a local construction company, working long hours in the blistering heat to save up for trade school. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it gave him a sense of purpose. Fast forward a few years, and Marcus had built a reputation for himself as one of the hardest-working electricians in the city. He'd earned his license, started his own small business, and was finally in a position to buy his first home. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was his. A 3-bedroom house with a backyard big enough for a pool, something he'd always dreamed of having. When he signed the papers and got the keys, he felt a sense of pride he'd never known before. This was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything he'd overcome. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared his enthusiasm. From the moment he moved in, Marcus could feel the stares. Some of his new neighbors were friendly enough, waving hello or stopping by to introduce themselves. But others? Not so much. Karen, in particular, seemed to have a problem with him from day one. At first, Marcus tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just having a bad day, or maybe she was shy. But as the weeks went by, it became clear that her attitude wasn't going to change. It started with little things. She'd make comments about his car being parked too close to her driveway, even though it was clearly on his property. She'd complain about the noise when he was doing yard work, even though it was the middle of the day. And then there were the looks, the kind that made Marcus feel like he didn't belong. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that he wasn't going to let one person ruin his happiness. But deep down, it bothered him. Why couldn't she just let him live his life? The pool was the final straw. Marcus had saved up for years to install it, and he was thrilled when it was finally finished. It wasn't just for him. It was for his family, his friends, and anyone else who wanted to come over and enjoy it. He'd even invited some of the neighbors to a pool party shortly after it was done, hoping to break the ice and show them that he was just a regular guy who wanted to be part of the community. Most of them came, and they seemed to have a good time. But Karen? She didn't even bother to show up. Instead, she started making complaints. First, it was about the noise. Then, it was about the unsightly pool equipment in his backyard. And then, it was about the kids who came over to swim, claiming they were too rowdy and disruptive. Marcus tried to reason with her, but it was like talking to a brick wall. No matter what he said or did, she always found something to criticize. It was exhausting, and it was starting to take a toll on him. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to back down. He'd faced challenges before, and he'd always found a way to overcome them. This time, though, it felt different. This wasn't just about a pool or a nosy neighbor. This was about respect, about his right to exist in a space he'd worked so hard to create. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him, so when Karen showed up that Saturday, yelling about permits and disruptions, something inside Marcus snapped. He'd had enough. But what could he do? He couldn't just ignore her, not when she was standing in his backyard, accusing him of things he hadn't done. He couldn't call the police, not when he knew how that could play out. And he couldn't confront her directly, not without risking an even bigger scene. No, he needed to do something else. Something that would make her think twice about messing with him again. As he stood there, staring at her across the fence, an idea began to form in his mind. It was risky, and it might not work, but it was the only thing he could think of. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest, and made his decision. He was going to fight back, not with words or fists, but with something far more powerful. Something that would leave Karen speechless and make her realize that she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. But what was that something? What could Marcus possibly do to turn the tables on Karen and reclaim his peace? That's the question that hung in the air as the tension between them reached its breaking point. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the backyard, Marcus knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The question was, would it be for better or for worse?